Hello, everyone. Awesome. We have figured it all out. Thank you so much for being patient with us on Zoom and in person. It's lovely to see you all. So we'll just get started here. So welcome to this month's Wellness Wednesday. My name is Deanna, and I'm the program assistant for the BC Brain Wellness Program. And we'll be serving as your MC today. I'm very excited to be here in person for our second hybrid event in celebration of World Brain Day 2024. We are joined by our amazing speakers, Dr. Silke Appel-Cresswell, Cynthia Friesen, and Tara Gaertner, all over here, who will be sharing their expertise regarding various topics surrounding brain health, lifestyle, music, and research, all in a spirit of exploring how we can protect our brains, our future. Before we dive in, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that the BC Brain Wellness Program at the Javad Mofajian Center for Brain Health resides on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam people. As a settler myself here, it's crucial to recognize the profound relationships we have with the Indigenous peoples and the land, and to continuously honor and nurture these connections. It is a privilege to be able to offer a program on Musqueam land. As we join from various locations today, I urge each of us to pause and reflect on the history of the land we inhabit. You can explore more about the land's history through the resource provided in the chat. So I am going to introduce our amazing speakers today, and I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker here, which is the co-founder and director of the BC Brain Wellness Program, Dr. Silke Appel-Cresswell, who is a movement disorder neurologist and associate professor for medicine neurology at UBC. She holds the Marge Makel Professorship for Research in Parkinson's Disease and directs the Pacific Parkinson's Research Center at UBC. Her research focuses on the role of the microbiome in Parkinson's disease and other brain disorders, nutrition and other lifestyle interventions as non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's, and is a leader in the use of ultrasound guidance for botulinum toxin injections in movement disorders. Next, I will introduce Cynthia Friesen, which is our program's team lead for the expression and creation programs, having accomplished her ARCT in performance at the Conservatory in Toronto, studying both piano and voice. With her experience in television and radio production, she eventually found herself conducting a children's choir at her church. Now she is balancing a coaching practice of voice students at her home studio with 2 community music partners, facilitating the music classes for the BC Brain Wellness Program, offering opportunities to support creative aging and life enrichment for participants. Alongside her brain wellness program involvement, Cynthia conducts the junior choral program for St. James Music Academy, sits on the board for Room 217 Music Care, and the Community Programming Advisory Committee for UBC's Chan Center for the Arts. Co-presenting with Cynthia, Dr. Tara Gaertner is a neuroscientist, psychiatrist in training, and music educator. She holds a bachelor's degree in music from McGill University, a PhD in neuroscience from music from the University of Texas, Houston, and an MD from UBC. She has taught piano, flute, and children's music classes for over 20 years. She taught neuroscience for over 15 years at the University of British Columbia in the Department of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy. She is currently a resident doctor in the research track in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of British Columbia. With her background in neuroscience research and her experience as a music teacher, Tara is passionate about understanding how our brains process and learn music, and about how we can harness the power of music to prevent and treat the mental health conditions. I would also like to take a moment to thank all of our donors for supporting the BC Brain Wellness Program. Because of your generosity, we are able to provide these educational events and our online classes, creating accessibility to anyone and everyone. As an entirely donor-funded program, we rely on your generosity to ensure the continuation and development of our program. So thank you for your ongoing support. So now, without further ado, I'd like to pass on the Zoom mic to our first guest speaker, Dr. Silke. The floor is all yours. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Diana and Bonnie and Lisa for preparing all of that, and a very warm welcome to all of you here and of course online as well. All right, so World Brain Day 2024. I was really delighted to see that this is actually dedicated to prevention. Long overdue, very much what we do here, of course, but it really is overdue. And I think just the fact that this World Brain Day is dedicated to prevention is a huge step in the right direction. And so the theme is protecting our future. We see the brain here, the picture, and the brain really is this last frontier in medicine. It is probably one of the most complex things we know in our universe that we are aware of. And as you see in this picture here, it is also a highly social organ. It makes us who we are. It allows us to lead the lives we're living, to do the things, to feel the feelings, to think, to really be us. Our brain is absolutely central to our well-being, and it has a huge impact. The well-being of our brain then also has a huge impact, not only on our lives, but also on society. World Brain Day is put on by the World Federation of Neurology, so this is really a global event. And it is in partnership with the WHO, the World Health Organization Action Plan on Epilepsy and Other Neurological Disorders, which was launched in 2022. And the WHO describes their goals with that, saying brain health is valued, promoted, and protected across the life course. So this is the goal. That neurological disorders are prevented, diagnosed, and treated, that premature mortality and morbidity is avoided, and that people affected by neurological disorders and their carers attain the highest possible level of health with equal rights, opportunities, respect, and autonomy. And of course, one core part to achieving this mission is to look at brain conditions in a united way, rather than just dividing this up into the gazillion different brain conditions that can happen. This is a very complex organ, and so you have also a very complex set of diseases. But it makes much more sense to talk about brain conditions together, because that will make us much more powerful when we advocate to governments and the powers of the day. So why is this important? Just to give you a little bit of a global perspective. So it is World Brain Day, so I'm trying to look at this also more globally, and in regions that are less fortunate and less bestowed with healthcare and financial abilities than we are here. So in 2017, 43% of children under 5 in low and middle income children, and that's 250 million children, are at risk of not reaching their developmental potential because of extreme poverty and stunting. So stunting being not having enough nutrition, for example. So both physical growth as well as brain development will be not reaching the full potential. This is just other than the individual costs that cannot be measured in finances, but finances, of course, do play a role, and measuring things in dollar amount seems to be, to at least the decision makers of the day, always a really good argument. This stunted development is also associated with a 26% reduced annual earning as adults. And so new terms such as brain capital or healthy brain years or cognitive footprints have now emerged and are becoming more mainstream to describe the impact of our brain health or not health on societies and on individuals. So brain health is now a global policy priority, and this is really about time. When we look at the impact of brain disorders globally, we do so with a term called disability adjusted life years, or DALYs. And on the right side of the slide, you can here see what this definition of DALYs is. So it is a combination, it is the sum of years that are either affected by living with a disability due to this neurological or brain condition, plus the years lost of lost life, so premature death. And so adding these 2 years up, living with disability plus years that are lost, that is known as DALYs. And when we look at that, neurological conditions alone are the #1 leading cause for these years lost. They are also the second leading cause of death. Brain disorders affect about 40% of the world population. That's a whopping 3.4 billion people. And they, as I mentioned, affect a really wide range of societal and individual functions and outcomes. And these conditions are expected to grow due to an aging population, and as mentioned, come at an enormous cost individually and societally. When we look at the neurological disorders that are the key hitters in terms of DALYs, so these disability and life lost years, stroke is very clearly the #1. And if you look at the different regions of the world, high income, low income, it is pretty much the leading cause throughout. And I'd like you to keep that in mind because there's another staggering number coming soon. Then neonatal brain damage, migraines. So this is not, migraines is not years lost of life, but living with migraine can be very disabling. Alzheimer's and other dementias, diabetic neuropathy, so nerve damage due to diabetes, meningitis, so a bacterial or viral infection of the brain and the linings of the brain, epilepsies or seizures, neurological complications due to preterm birth. And that, of course, is closely connected to maternal care as well, autism spectrum disorders, cancers of the nervous system, and then 11 is Parkinson's disease. And here's the big question: why is prevention so important? And there's the second really shocking number. 90% of strokes are preventable. High blood pressure is one of the leading causes of stroke, but there's a whole list of at least 17 other causes as well. 40% of dementia cases, and this number might actually be higher. 25% of epilepsies are preventable, and that has to do with infections that can lead to seizures later on, with brain trauma as well, so traumatic brain injury. Controlling lead exposure, and this is not so much an issue here, but this is an issue in lower income countries. Controlling lead exposure could dramatically reduce the intellectual disability burden. And you're reducing high fasting plasma glucose, and that is a problem across the countries, whether high or low income. That has then further impact on stroke, but also on things like dementia. When we look at the number of neurologists, there is a huge discrepancy between high and low income countries, but in all countries, there are too few of us. So there are on average 3.1 neurologists per 100,000 people. That is really not a lot. So for comparison, we've got about 250 physicians for 100,000 people in Canada. Looking at the huge impact that brain conditions have on people, this is really quite little. And in low-income countries, you might find countries that have no neurologists, or something like 0.1 neurologists per 100,000 people. And when you then add what is termed, and the terminology is a little bit fuzzy there, brain conditions are often understood as neurological conditions, and they are often treated separate from mental health conditions, which to me, as somebody who's trained in both, I'm of course a neurologist, but I did a lot of psychiatry training as well, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It is all the brain, and the same condition of Parkinson's, which is the condition that I see the most, is of course both neurological, core neurological symptoms, but at least as many and as impactful psychiatric and mental health symptoms as well. So if you add all of this up, if you take the mental health and the neurological health conditions, then the brain conditions are really leaving everybody else in the dust, really. And the interesting thing is that the risk factors and the changes we would need to make are actually shared between those conditions, not surprisingly, since they're all affecting the brain. So coming back to prevention, since this is the theme of the day, here is a graphic that should show in principle what we are envisioning as prevention in Parkinson's disease. There is still a lot of work to do. And it talks about primary prevention, secondary prevention, tertiary prevention. So primary prevention refers to a prevention action you take before a disease starts. So that is usually population-based. That could be something like wearing your seatbelts, improving education for children, banning toxins in the environment, increasing physical activity across the population, improving nutrition across the population, vaccinations, monitoring and management of risk factors. So for example, high blood pressure to prevent future strokes. So that is something that happens in this first, I don't know, can you see my cursor? Yeah, you can. In the healthy phase. And what we're trying to do is to really enhance the brain reserve, the resilience of the brain. And then there is secondary prevention. So that is identifying people at risk. So for example, because somebody has a genetic mutation, or they had maybe, they already have prodromal features, or they have had exposures that put them at high risk. And then it is to monitor that, to make a prompt diagnosis, start treatment promptly, and then hopefully delaying decline. And if you look at these curves here, instead of going down the hill here, you hope to, with the secondary prevention here, you're hoping to delay any decline and then slow the decline so that you might not even cross the symptomatic level, which is the red line here, even though there's a process underneath that is not symptomatic yet. And then tertiary prevention refers to established disease. So somebody already has a brain condition, in the case of our graphic here, Parkinson's disease. And the hope is to slow or halt their progression and to improve function. And nutrition is actually, I've mentioned this a few times now, and it's I like food, so I'm giving you this example. But not only because I like food, but also because nutrition really is a really heavy hitter when it comes to impact on a very wide range of conditions: neurological, mental health, physical, otherwise, from cancers to cardiovascular diseases, etc. And the Lancet Commission on Healthy Diets and Food Systems quoted, said, unhealthy diets pose a greater risk to morbidity and mortality than does unsafe sex and alcohol, drug and tobacco use combined. That's a lot, and they calculated that a shift to healthy diets would avert about 11 million deaths per year worldwide, and that would be a reduction of about 20%. So diet would be, and improving nutrition, including maternal nutrition to optimize brain development for the baby, and then of course early life nutrition through the whole of school, but then going literally to the very end would make a huge difference. So what is a healthy diet? You probably heard me say this many, many times, but you can't say it often enough. So a diversity of mostly plant-based foods, carbohydrates from whole grains rather than refined carbohydrates, fish and omega-3 sources several times per week, modest consumption of eggs and poultry, low amounts of animal-sourced food, unsaturated rather than saturated fats, and then really limit the high processed foods and the added sugars. The Mediterranean diet and the MIND diet, which is like a Mediterranean diet taken a step further, have benefits across many health conditions, so cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, weight management, metabolic syndrome, cancers, cognitive decline, Parkinson's, etc. And it does so by targeting many different mechanisms in the body. And that is also one of the, or this is leading me to looking at risk factors for dementia. Nutrition, I've added here in this little blue blurb, wasn't even mentioned in this infographic that was based on work from Livingston in 2020. But the 12 dementia risk factors that were, hold on, that were identified then were physical inactivity, smoking, excessive alcohol consumption, air pollution, but I would say in the meantime, there are many other pollutants that are in water and the food, etc. So this is not just air pollution, but air pollution is of course important for us as well with wildfire season underway. Infrequent social contact, and I'll get back to that. This is, of course, also the topic of the day, and Cynthia and Tara will talk more about this as well. Obesity and therefore also nutrition, as just mentioned, hearing impairment, but also other sensory impairments, such as visual impairments, depression, but also chronic stress, for example. Stress can be positive, but chronic negative stress would also is a risk factor for brain diseases, diabetes, hypertension, less education, and I have added to ongoing cognitive activities, including creative activities, including things like music, and I'm really delighted that we'll have a practical experience later, and of course head injury. Back then, what wasn't, for example, looked at was sleep. We have learned a whole deal more about sleep in the meantime, and how sleep is absolutely vital to just clean out all the garbage that the brain accumulates whilst it is working during the day. And it really only can do that. It's being flushed out by lymphatic fluid when it is sleeping. Really, this would be a whole talk in itself. It's such a really fascinating topic, but I'll skip that for now. And then we have so looking at this, this really multi-domain, very complex picture of risk factors, the Finnish group, or a Finnish group of researchers, started the so-called FINGER trials. They are the Finnish Geriatric Intervention Study to Prevent Cognitive Impairment and Disability. They were really trailblazers there in these multi-domain interventions. In this case, it is diet, physical activity, cognitive training, and then they very much looked at managing risk factors such as high blood pressure, high cholesterol, etc. This was a 2-year intervention. And it actually ended up in showing that you can really lower the risk of cognitive decline. And the people who were in the actual active intervention compared to the regular health advice group had actually overall better cognitive function, better executive function, and better processing speed. So they showed in principle that this is possible. And a more recent study, this is really hot off the press, just published last month by Dean Ornish in San Francisco. They did a pilot study in people who already have mild cognitive impairment and early Alzheimer's disease. So this is taking this now a step further, in that this is relevant to people who already have symptoms. So we're moving from, primary or secondary prevention to tertiary prevention here. And this is a relatively small, it's a pilot trial, 51 participants, also a combination of diet, exercise, stress management, importantly also group support and supplements. And they did the intervention for 20 weeks. So this is a much shorter trial than the 2-year FINGER study, and also compared to the usual wait list. And there's overall an improvement in their key cognitive and function outcomes, and that was mirrored by an improvement in some of the key biomarkers. And these outcomes worsened in the wait list. And I think I can say Dr. Ornish will come and will be our keynote speaker when we celebrate our 5th birthday in October. So I'm really excited to hear much more about the study than the brief vignette that I'm giving you right now. We have the Impact 360 study. This is also actually studies because we've got one for healthy ages and one for people living with Parkinson's disease. So whoever is now inspired to maybe participate and sign up for that, you can do this here at UBC. It's also a combined intervention. It's a group-based intervention, and why this is important, you will see in a moment. With mindfulness, exercise, and nutrition, it's like health camp for 6 months. Compared to waitlist, and then the waitlist also starts the same intervention, so you will get the intervention regardless. It's just a question of how soon you will start it. And again, we're looking for people who are healthy and getting older, and then people living with Parkinson's. And that brings me, I've mentioned the words group and social connectedness and several times, and of course this is going to be one of the topics that the two of you are going to address today. That brings me to the importance of social connectedness. And the WHO in their position paper, Optimizing Brain Health Across the Life Course, I thought had a really lovely picture here that tells a story between the generations, and that already establishes this human connection that is so important for both of these individuals here. And when we look across the life course, in childhood, it has clearly been shown that a responsive caregiver is really crucial for brain development and connectivity. Adverse childhood experiences, and I'm talking not just the minor upsets that shape us and that are character building, but I'm talking about these toxic stress, abuse, etc. They can really change how a child's brain develops, how it is connected, how the stress systems of the brain and the body are reacting, how sensitive they are, whether somebody is more at risk of stress reaction, mental health problems later in life as well. And this continues then also through adulthood. I just witnessed the 18th birthday of our youngest with a big party yesterday, and I reminded myself as I was writing the talk that this is really important because they're all making a lot of noise, but also they are making all these connections, and it is really crucial for them. A greater number of social connections is also associated with brain volume, and with the quality of the connections are associated with quality of brain volume of areas for memory in older adults. And social supports for older adults are also linked to better executive function. They are linked to better emotional regulation, memory, and cognitive resilience. And now we can't go forwards. Bear with me, my computer is clearly not connected and it's suffering, as we can see. There we go. So loneliness is distress due to a perceived discrepancy between the desired and the existing social relationships. So if you're very happy with 3 people and they're really good connections, that might work. But if you actually want to have more connections and you don't, then that would be an issue. And I see that I'm running slightly late here. We started late, but I apologize. I'll try to be quick now. The problem of loneliness is so big that the US Surgeon General actually featured loneliness as a major public health issue last year. And he wrote a really lovely, if anybody wants to read this, there's a very personal account there that I think is worth reading. And it also quotes some numbers. The loneliness is associated, of course, with an increased risk for anxiety and depression, but also heart disease, dementia, 50% higher risk, and stroke. Poor immune system function, increased inflammation, which is in its extent similar to not exercising, an increased risk of premature death, which is similar to smoking daily. That's from the Harvard Longitudinal Study of Aging. Reduced productivity at work, worse performance in school, reduced social engagement, and I think that is something we're all witnessing right now, societal polarization. Just briefly, the brain on loneliness clearly has an impact on several brain areas. Also leads to less wisdom and less compassion. And I will briefly mention this. Loneliness in people living with Parkinson's disease. So first of all, loneliness is associated with an increased risk in Parkinson's later on. This was a finding from the UK Brain Bank study or UK Biobank study. And about a quarter to half of people living with Parkinson's disease also report loneliness, which I think illustrates really quite dramatically how brain disorders can be very isolating. And unfortunately, this then also predicts the future quality of life as well as several functional outcomes. Interestingly enough, the UK actually is quite a bit ahead of us because they've got something like that is called social prescribing. And that really is prescribing activities that brings people together, group activities. It can be a parenting program, that could be community activities from gardening to cooking. It, of course, can be art-based and music, and we'll practice that. And of course, it can be exercise. The New England Journal of Medicine, the highest or one of the high-hitting journals in medicine, has also been commenting on that. And of course, this is exactly what our intention was with our BC Brain Wellness Program from the very inception. It is group-based. We wanted to create community, and it's really lovely to see you all here. And one, you know, of course, we do the program delivery, education, research, and there are the creative expressive projects, as well as things like the intergenerational project, which is led by our social worker, Elaine Book. We will hear much more about the music part of that in a second. And so I'm just concluding now. Brain diseases have an enormous impact on individuals and societies. Many neurological diseases are actually either preventable, at least to a degree, or at least delayable. When living with a chronic brain condition, prevention can significantly improve well-being and function. Effective prevention requires targeted social policies, societal policies, education, as well as individual action. And I advocate for easily accessible programs to support healthy lifestyles, activities, and connectedness. And those should be at the core of true healthcare. And with that, I thank you very much and hand it over to Cynthia and Tara.
Thank you so much, Silke. As always, inspiring and just really helping us hone in on the focus for today. This is Tara, and as much as we are only two people, part of a broader research team, I have to say a small correction that as much as I wish that our study would have lasted 2 years, we only had funding for 3 months. So that's, you know, we are providing today just a little bit of a window into some of the social connection and just the well-being that was found through song, through singing together. So that's what you're going to hear about from us. So this first slide, this is really just telling you, actually we could stay where you were, Bonnie. So it's Dr. Frank Russo, and we want to make sure that we point out the names there of Dr. Frank Russo, the principal director, and Dr. Arla Good, the co-director. So the Singwell project was it is funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. It's a 7-year international research partnership, and it's led by Dr. Frank Russo, who is both the principal investigator and the science director for Singwell, and then also Dr. Arla Good, who is the lead researcher and the co-director of Singwell. Dr. Frank Russo and Dr. Arla Good are both at TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University, and Dr. Frank Russo teaches there in psychology. So thank you for staying there for a second. Our UBC study team is a contributor to the Singwell project, and it's a multi-hub research group with a number of different studies happening across Canada. And they're all investigating the emerging virtual group singing technologies and practices and how people connect through those singing hubs. There are a few choirs that are also happening that are in person, but not as many. And their focus is on people who have communication challenges, and brain conditions certainly fall into that category. So Rena Sharon, although she seems like a doctor to me because she's ever wise. She is the principal investigator for our UBC research study, and she's a full professor of collaborative piano studies at the School of Music here. So one really fantastic thing for us was being able to involve School of Music, also the Faculty of Education, because that's where I'm currently getting a master's, and Dr. Peter Gazousis is my advisor. He was a part of this study. And then Faculty of Medicine, of course, with Dr. Cresswell involved in our study as well. I think that covers mostly, well, Dr. Deborah Sheets, Dr. Julia Ulela, University of Victoria, and then also School of Music. And then we had some fantastic research assistants, Gael and Manat.
So I'll sort of set the stage, so to speak, for our study by talking a little bit about what we already know about the benefits of group singing. So there's actually a fair body of research that has shown that singing in a group, whether it's choir singing or just getting together and singing sort of less formally, has a lot of benefits. It leads to improved mood. And we also know quite clearly that even compared to other social activities, music is something that promotes social bonding with a stronger effect than other social activities. It leads to decreased stress, both as reported by the participants and based on biomarkers of stress, and overall can increase physical well-being, whether that's through improving respiration in people with respiratory difficulties or boosting immune function. And overall, people who participate in group singing on a regular basis have improved quality of life. And what's interesting is trying to understand the mechanisms. Why does music or singing in a group cause all these differences? I mean, and part of it is certainly the emotional aspects of music itself, but we also know that it has this social effect. And we also know that when you're singing, you're required to take deep breaths. And so that's going to have a physical effect on our body. So that all these three things together are part of what makes group singing so beneficial. Go ahead, and Cynthia, we're going to go back.
Fantastic. And you can see we pulled that slide out of the archives there, Silke. When we first started our singing class with the BC Brain Wellness Program, it was in person here at the Center for Brain Health. But of course, then with the pandemic, we moved all our programming online. And so what we were playing with a bit in this study is a technology that's been developed by some folks down at Stanford. And it's, oh yeah, thanks. There we go. And their technology is called Jack Trip, and it allows people to sing synchronously in an online space. How does it do that? It sort of removes or diminishes the latency, which is common in a traditional Zoom space. If we had all the people in our Zoom room here today turn on their audio and all talk at the same time, we wouldn't get anything clear. They would be kind of cutting each other out. And that's just latency. And that's very common in a lot of online technologies. So Jack Trip has found a way to diminish that, and we could hear each other singing at the same time. So that was the second part of our study, but I am getting ahead of myself a little bit because there was also a lot of goodness and a lot of connection that we still found in Zoom, because we weren't connected with audio when we were singing, but we could still share stories with one another, and we could ask questions of one another, and we could breathe together. And I would tell them to sing with their eyes. So, we found ways to still connect, and that was still valuable, we found in the course of things.
So the study that we put together was to try to understand the benefits of group singing in an online format and to compare the sort of regular Zoom type of singing where everybody has to be muted because of this lag with the new technology, Jack Trip, where everybody can hear each other singing. How is that going to affect well-being and people's responses to singing together? So that was the goal of our study. So we took advantage of the BC Brain Wellness Program, already having singing groups. And we put together this virtual and online singing class where the first half, more or less, was conducted over Zoom. It ended up being 7 sessions on Zoom. And then the second half was using Jack Trip, where everybody could hear each other singing. And we wanted to compare between those two different conditions. There were 18 participants in our study, and it was as the BC brain wellness population is. Some of the participants had neurological conditions, some were care partners of people with neurological conditions, and other people were healthy agers, for lack of a better word, or third age learners who just wanted to participate, maybe to increase their brain wellness.
A term that I find myself just rolling off my tongue a little bit easier currently is a lifespan learner. You'll hear a lot about lifespan learning, and that's something that that is within our BC Brain Wellness community. And well, Tara and I, frankly, because we're both, you know, a little older than a lot of you students in this space. But this is our study timeline. So we just I think you've kind of gone over this actually for the sake of time. The reason we had a 7th session where we were on traditional Zoom is because the technology was proving to be quite challenging. And they have made vast improvements at Jack Trip even since last fall. So this fall, we're going to be launching a Jack Trip singing collective in addition to the other musical class that's on offer at BC Brain Wellness. It is now an app, and most people on their computers can just have the app if they have a fairly strong internet. So that's a lot easier than these hard units, these bridge units that we had to use. The research assistants were running into people's homes, trying to help them figure out how to get it directly into Ethernet cables. And there were challenges. So we kind of just said, let's give ourselves an extra week. We're still enjoying singing and we're enjoying each other's company. So let's not have all this. We figured our stress markers would be through the roof anyway, because we were all kind of a bit worked up about this technology. And that's how we ended up with the 7 over Zoom. But we did surveys at the beginning. We had focus groups halfway through, and then also at the end, and those were run by Dr. Julia Lehela, and she really spoke to their sense of connection to others and whether they found the music was just putting them into a gentler place, both psychologically and physically in their body, whether they were feeling any differences. So they talked about these things in the focus groups. And then they always had these questionnaires that they were answering as well. And then Tara, well, I'm going to let you speak to the salivary samples, because that's more your stick than me.
Sure. Maybe we can move on and I'll talk about it more when we get to showing the results of that. So we had surveys before and after each of the singing sessions that we asked the participants to fill out. And one of the questions we asked them was about social connectedness. How connected do you feel to this group of people? And what we asked them to rate that on a 5-point scale. And then we wanted to see the change in that number. So if somebody said, well, before the session, I feel my connection to the group is a 3, and after the session, I feel that my connection to the group is a 4, then that would show up as a 1-point difference on this graph on the y-axis. And along the bottom, we've got the sessions. It's not showing up as well on that screen as it is on the computer here. Maybe can I use them? Can you see my pointer there? They don't. Oh, there it is. So here's our 1-point difference up here. The orange dots are for the Zoom sessions, and the turquoisey ones are for the Jack Trip sessions where people could hear each other singing. And so what we can see is overall, in all of the sessions, except for perhaps the very first Jack Trip session, in all of the sessions, people found that after the class, they felt more connected to the other people than they did before the class, because that's an increase in connection over time. And we'll talk a little bit more about what happened in that first Jack Trip class. But I think in this case, we can say that there was a decrease in connection because some people had difficulty connecting to the group at that point.
Yeah. And staying with our color theme, we've got some quotes that are from the regular Zoom sessions, and then quotes that are from the Jack Trip sessions. And so, as you can see, there was a sense of camaraderie, some joy, and and rewarding to not feel isolated. And that was certainly, that's how I see this fitting into this broader theme of prevention for World Brain Day, is music can be that tool that gets us out of this place of feeling quite lonely and isolated, because we are in many ways more connected than ever, but we're navigating things in our own circles and in our own corners. And so music can be that bridge. And that's what we really felt that some of these quotes show to you.
We also asked people about their mood on the questionnaires before and after each class. And we asked them to rate how much do you feel happy? How much do you feel peaceful? How much do you feel jittery? How much do you feel angry? And so those are some positive emotions and some negative emotions. And we divided those up and added the scores together. And what we can see from these graphs is that over the sessions, positive emotions increase by attending the music class and negative emotions decrease. And again, the exception is in that session 8, the very first Jack Trip session. And part of that is because of the problems that some people had connecting to the group. But at the same time, there was an unfortunate, sad incident in Cynthia's life, which she shared with the group. And I think that it did bring the mood of that class down. And that happens in life somehow, but that explains what we see in these results. What I find interesting is if you look at the change in positive emotion, it kind of sits about the same levels through across all of the orange dots, the Zoom sessions. And then in the Jack Trip sessions, you can see session 9, 10, 11, there's a trend upwards. And it goes back down for session 12. And we think that's because after session 12, people were sad that the class was over. They knew that was the last session. So when I look at that trend, my guess is that if we had continued and had session 13, 14, 15, 16, we would see those blue dots level out at a higher level. I think that there would be more increase in positive emotion if we continued doing the Jack Trip. However, that's not what the data shows at this point.
Yes, one can have a well laid out plan, but it doesn't necessarily work out that that everything stays in line. And so, as Tara mentioned, there was a tragedy that came into my family circle, and I just couldn't sing because I was so emotional that I shared it, and that did influence our sense of joy, but it actually brought some connection in deeper ways. So there are mysteries in our life experiences sometimes. And I just wanted to say that session 11 was a chance to do some musical things that we hadn't been able to do when we were on Zoom, such as singing in a canon and singing with some harmony. These are not people who were, they weren't trained musicians in any way. They were just finding some natural sense of musical connection, and with some gentle guidance, they were able to sing in a round, which was just a phenomenal experience for everyone to be able to have online. So again, a few quotes that just share what the experiences was in the traditional Zoom session, and then it's mentioned here in that first session of our Jack Trip that we were emotional, but we were finding resilience together too.
We also we asked people to report their pain levels before and after each class. And as you can see by the dots being below the black line, pain levels went down over the class. The numbers, the absolute value in the numbers is quite small, and that's because many people did not report a lot of pain at any point, but we do see a decrease in pain, and it doesn't seem to, based on this, to make a big difference whether it was a Zoom class or a Jack Trip class. All of them cause a small decrease in pain reports. The graph on the right looks at cortisol concentration. So cortisol is a stress hormone, and we can measure it in saliva. So we asked our participants to collect saliva samples before and after each class and put them in their freezer. And we had our research assistants pick them up, and then we analyze the cortisol concentrations in them. And what we see is that the cortisol concentrations go down. We only did it in certain classes, but we see a decrease in cortisol concentration over each of those classes. And again, it doesn't seem really to matter whether it's a Jack Trip class or a Zoom class, the cortisol goes down, indicating that stress levels go down. So one of the things that's really interesting in these results is that we see that social connectedness and mood seem to depend on the type of class that even though those things, we do see an increase in positive emotion and an increase in social connectedness in both the Zoom, but it seems even more when people can hear each other singing. But the more physical things, the pain, the cortisol levels, doesn't seem to matter. And so what we think is that your mood is connected to the social connection, but these more physical benefits, maybe they're because of singing. Maybe that has to do with the breathing that's involved in singing, and it's not so much connected to the social connectedness. That's our theory.
And we learned recently at the Music and Health Research Institute with other presentations about Singwell studies that this is actually not just our study. This was, you could see some consistency in some of the other Singwell studies that stress, that lowering of stress was really kind of more just the things that you were doing on your own. You didn't need to be heard, but the social connection came out of being heard with the Jack Trip. So that shows some consistency there. And again, just a few quotes that speak to the experience of participants. And if you haven't figured it out yet, I'm kind of more the storyteller, and Tara is really good with the harder quantitative data. So, but this just gives you a little bit of a window into what the participants were experiencing in the study.
So yeah, one last graph from me. We asked people just to rate their overall experience of the class on a scale of 0 to 5. And you can see that their overall experience was pretty consistently about a 4 over all of the Zoom sessions, and that there was a bit of a dip for that first Jack Trip class, and then it went up again. And those last 2 points, 11 and 12, are higher. And again, we think that probably if we had continued, then we would see a sort of a plateau at that higher level of people enjoying the class.
Yeah, and those last few classes did emulate more of what you experience in person when you are singing with others, because of that ability to hear them and to hear your own voice in that context of the other voices. So those of you who are here in person today will be able to explore that a little bit with us shortly. And that just again says some gratitude pieces to those who were part of our little study.
So thank you so much for those beautiful presentations. I learned so much, and I hope you all did as well. So now we're moving on to the question portion, which we'll be asking questions in person. First, would you all like to come up by the mic? And if any of you have questions, raise your hand. And I believe if you press the mic in front of you, it should register. If not, be loud. Okay. Are there any questions?
So there was one online, what is plasma glucose levels? So I can quickly answer that too.
Sure. Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
So plasma glucose levels are the sugar levels in the blood. And that is important because if they go too high, that is very damaging. This happens in diabetes, and it's essentially insulin taking the sugar out of the blood and bringing it into the tissues, into the muscles, and into the brain, and to the cells where we actually need and burn the sugar to make energy to sustain our life. And if it essentially ends up just being in the blood, it's not going to do much good there, just the opposite. It's going to damage our body. So that's why plasma glucose levels, blood sugar levels are important.
I had a question. So when I know you mentioned in the presentation regular health advice, what exactly does that look like?
So this is a very common control group, which is just whatever regular healthcare exists in that particular country or in those centers where the study was done. So they would go to their GP and they might have a memory clinic, but it wasn't something that was as concentrated, motivating, etc., as the actual active intervention is.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any questions in person? Yes, go ahead. Try the mic.
So the question was if there's future directions for our study. Yes, we're still figuring out exactly what those are, but I think there's still a lot more to study. One of the questions that we may look at is in a study like this or in a singing group, sometimes there are singing groups that are designed specifically for people with Parkinson's or specifically for people with respiratory issues or a particular disease. But then our study was a mixed group. And there's one of the questions is, well, which is better? Would it be better to have a choir that's all people with Parkinson's disease or all people with dementia? Or is it better to integrate them, which ends up with better wellness at the end? So that's one of the directions we may go, but I'm interested to hear from everybody else. And the social time, if you have ideas of what questions you think there still are out there, because I think there's lots.
And just as a little follow-up to that, when we first made our proposal to Sing Well, they did come back to us and say, but couldn't you just do it specifically for people who have one neurologic condition? And we said that since we were recruiting through the BC Brain Wellness Program, and the ethos really did feel more that it was about creating this community that necessarily didn't define people by the condition they were living with, that we really wanted to, at least with the first study, have it be within that context of sort of just being able to have this pocket of time together where we were making music and there was, we were just people singing together. But now we have other questions. Yeah, so to be continued.
Amazing. Any other questions in person? Yes, go ahead.
Earlier in the presentation, there was a mention of Dr. Dean Ornish's work and the research that he's conducting. I was just curious if you're familiar with the work of Dr. Dale Bredesen and Apollo Health and the work they've been doing since about 2014 on that.
I'm not, but I'm sure you can tell me. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Yeah, fortunately, I think there's some pioneers like Dr. Ornish, but others as well, who really have been driving this holistic health idea and multimodal lifestyle-based intervention forwards for many decades. And I think we all stand on the shoulders of those giants doing that now. I'm just reading a book by a 103-year-old physician, Gladys Mack, somebody or other. And she was one of the co-founders of the American Holistic Medicine Society, like 60, a long time ago. She's been a physician for 60 years and she's writing about the healthy life and essentially prevention, really. And it's quite fascinating to see that there are real visionaries out there who've been doing this for a long time and who probably weren't heard for the longest time and who were maybe told, well, you know, all your exercise and diet stuff and social connectedness, this is not real science and this is not really where it is at. And now we're finding out that, not surprisingly, given that we have evolved as human beings, moving, eating, being social, that this is exactly what we need. Complementary to, of course, all the other amazing developments in medicine. But yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more.
Awesome. If you wouldn't mind just pressing your button again. Just, yeah, there we go. Awesome. Okay, anyone else today? There is that time for socializing as well if you want to ask those more direct questions. Yes, I will be going to online now. Just asking in person, we're good. Awesome. Okay. Would you mind? So, what is the value of using metformin to improve cognitive function 3 years post hemorrhagic stroke.
Yeah, those are very specialized questions. So metformin, for anybody who doesn't know it, is a medication that is really used in diabetes. But it turned out that using metformin, so that when they compared people with diabetes who took metformin versus who did not take metformin, and then also comparing it in some of the studies to people who didn't have diabetes, that the people who were on metformin actually did better cognitively. But is it a medication that we use in clinic to enhance brain health, enhance cognition itself? Not quite yet, but if somebody has diabetes, then using metformin, if it is the right drug from other perspectives, because there are obviously other considerations here, then this might indeed be something to support brain health. But this is very much in the research space and requires more research at this point.
Moving on to the next question. Does reducing serum blood glucose levels from normal to low normal make any difference to cognitive function?
That's a good question. I'm not sure we really know the answer to that. You obviously don't want to go too low. There is a sweet spot. The brain does need energy. You don't want to starve yourself. That could actually be fairly dangerous if you go below normal. Of course, you know, these cutoffs, and they have actually been recently, a few years ago, they were adjusted. The normal upper level actually got lowered a little bit. But I'm not aware of studies comparing low normal to just normal levels. I think you could probably gain more impact rather than making that change. Rather enjoy food, eat healthy food. It's not just about the glucose, but, you know, plant-based, lots of fiber, healthy fats, avoid the processed food, etc. Do all these other things. I think that's probably more bang for your buck to improving brain health.
Thank you. Now coming to our last few questions. Any suggestions as to why the pain and cortisol levels increase towards the end of sessions, as evident from the bar chart?
I think what we saw with the cortisol levels is we measured in sessions, oh, thank you, I see it here, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. And over all the sessions, they did decrease. It looks like on the graph, they went down a little bit more in session 6 and session 10s, but they're not statistically different. If you analyze them statistically, that's basically the same difference, same decrease in cortisol levels in all the different sessions that we measured. And similarly in the pain, there was less decrease in pain in the session where that first Jack Tripp session, the session 8, where we found the same, that session was different from all the other ones. And so, which does show that there's an emotional, I think, component to how we experience pain, that if we're in a better mood, we don't feel as much pain. And if we're in a worse mood, we feel the pain more. And I think probably everybody has had that experience in their life where you're having a good time, you're feeling good, and you don't notice your pain in the same way that you do. So that's probably the connection there. Not sure if that answers the question.
Coming to our last question here, how can we participate in any of the music studies?
We'll be sure to tell you. You can keep an eye on the research page on the BC Brain Wellness Program website. And because we will continue, it is just a very ideal place for us to find our participants if we continue with another Singwell study. And the hope is that we will be able to do that, but you will be able to read about it there. And then just while I have the microphone, since we're likely going to lose our online people soon, be sure as you're preparing that phenomenal meal that's really good for you today at home, that you turn on your favorite song and sing or hum along.
John, yes.
All right, and so that concludes the presentation portion and Q&A of today's event. So thank you to all of you online for joining us. This is the official end. But thank you so much. It was wonderful to have you all for this presentation portion. Thank you.